Welcome to Drinks Coach. Yes, episode 33, series 2. Quite an exciting one, this. A couple of very, very good sparkling wines, I hope. I'm in no doubt they're going to be good, but a question of how good remains to be seen, because I'm going to taste these wines real time. They're made by people I consider good friends, Ian and Anna Kellett, and they're made at Hambledon in Winchester, very close to where I used to school. They've been making wine and have created a brand around Hambledon Vineyard since about 2007, I think, or 2004, around that time when the acquisition occurred. They replanted their first sort of practice wine, if you could call it that, was the single vineyard release in 2010. They made a few sort of like bench bottles before that. Everything looking very promising. I remember tasting a bottle of something which he had made way before they even had the branding, even had the bottles created the way they have now, from 2007, I think it was, and it already showed the manifest brilliance of the soils in Hampshire, which are capable of making, I think, really world-class sparkling wine. And there are various reasons for that. So let's start with Hambledon's history. Hambledon was a vineyard that was planted by the vineyard manager of Paul Rosé in 1952, I believe at the behest of Sir Winston Churchill, as a gift to Sir Guy Salisbury-Jones, Field Marshal of the landings of D-Day, to say thank you for saving so many thousands of lives. And he lived there and made wine there. And since 1952, they have been making wine on that site. And so it makes Hambledon the oldest continually producing winery in Britain. Before 1952, the last registered vineyards were being ripped up during the sack of the Romans or being used as communion wine in monasteries in Lincolnshire in the 1600s. So we're going back a long way before we find anything serious in terms of our heritage of winemaking in this country. I think it's common knowledge that the Romans planted vineyards and highly prized vineyards in the UK, which they used to fuel their garrisons. And in fact, some vineyards were actually grown on the south-facing wall of Hadrian's Wall, because it was a sun trap and because things were a bit warmer then. So there's lots of history behind the very nature of English wine, and I think it's rather wonderful that we're going back to kind of like ground zero with these guys. Hambledon is also in the village of Hambledon, where Lord wrote the modern rules of cricket on Halfpenny Green, is it? There's a cricket ground very, very close to the vineyard, less than a mile away, where the first ever real game of cricket was played. So there's this wonderful bit of English history behind it. We've got this war hero owning the vineyard, lovely gentleman, and had viticulturists there that I've actually met who had worked there for many, many decades. But then Ian came along and bought it, thought there was huge opportunity here because Ian, who was in the city, one of the most successful food business analysts in the country, if not the highest paid one anyway. And his job was to assess the profit potential of companies. I think one of the jobs he says to me was the hardest in his life was he was told to evaluate the cost of McDonald's. So he had to work out what the cost of McDonald's was worldwide, and subsequently has never eaten a burger outside his house ever since. He says the things he saw would stop you from doing such foolish things. Anyway, Ian also studied winemaking, did a biochemistry, I think, degree or bachelor's, and also did a winemaking degree at our beloved Plumpton College in Sussex. So this is building up to being a very, very good story. We've got a man who's well funded, who's got lots of good friends in the industry, who's passionate about the job, loves his wine, has a wonderful collection of wines himself. We became mates, and I haven't spent enough time with him and his family recently, but he has two very young children, but I hope that all changes in due course. And subsequently, the importer or the distributor of the wines has changed over the last few years and is now being distributed by Menzendorf. Now, for those people that know Menzendorf as an importer, they have the most extraordinary roster of delicious drinks, including great burgundies with chanson, with great cognacs with like Delamere, and great sherry and port and God knows what. But also, I believe that Bollinger, which is their largest brand, or maybe most important brand, are a significant owner of Menzendorf. So I think it speaks volumes for the quality of this brand that Menzendorf, owned by Bollinger, has chosen this to be their one and only principled English sparkling wine for distribution worldwide. And I don't think you can get a big up than that, can you really? So I'm going to open one of these while we talk. The vineyards are on deep Hampshire chalk. The chalk is made from belemnite squid, which is the same tiny crustacea you can find in the skein of chalk that goes under the Hampshire Downs, goes under the Channel, under the Paris Basin, directly underneath Paris itself, and then appears again in the area of Epernay in the Côte des Blancs Champagne. This is probably the rarest and one of the most prized and special wine growing soils on earth. Chardonnay grown in chalk and in chalk limestone soils is largely seen to be a marriage made in heaven. Doesn't come without its difficulties, chlorosis being one of them in the vineyard. But because of the capillarity of the soil, the capillarity means the ability to hold on to water. So it can absorb a lot of water, but it's held locked into the soil very, 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 very strongly by the physiology of the soil. It means that the vines have to work very hard to drag that wine back out, which actually makes for much healthier vines, much more athletic vines, if you like. They have to learn to be stronger. The vines grow more slowly. They have a shorter internodal distance, which means that the water is being sucked out of the ground with much more force because the vine is healthier, which means in poor vintages, and whether they're hot or cold, those vines produce better wines too. Which is the reason why, for example, in Chablis, all the Grand Crus are 100% chalk, because this soil is magical, not because of some weird mineral composition, but because it creates healthy vines which age for a long time and produce very, very fine wine in small quantities but in high concentration. So there you go, that's it in a nutshell. And we've got that in Hampshire. And you'll find there are a lot of people that also agree. You've got people like Exton Park, Jenkins Place, Coates and Seeley. Forgive me if I forgot Hattoney Valley. There are some really incredible vineyards down there, and I think in the grand scheme of things will be seen to be the Grand Cru of sparkling wines in Britain. Not knocking some of the exceptional wines being made in Kent, Dorset, Somerset, Cornwall and so forth, but I think Hampshire has something really rather special in its chalk vineyards. So this isn't the basic range. They have, I say basic's probably the wrong word, no such thing as there really. But classic Cuvée comes in a standard shaped bottle, and the classic Cuvée, there is a Brut and there is a Rosé. They are around £30 to £35 a bottle. I think it's climbing a little bit, but it's only because prices find their natural balance, and it's better than wines that are cheaper than it, and there are wines that may be slightly more expensive that are taking the mick. But when we look at these wines are really the top of what Hambledon is offering. This is the best that they're doing. Now, what is special about Hambledon also, apart from the very site that it's on, is Ian's philosophy with his winemakers. Shout out to Jonas and Felix, but also to Hervé Gestin. Hervé Gestin is the sort of consultant winemaker who helps with the blends and the crush every year, and has made over 250 million bottles of champagne in his lifetime. He's considered one of the great experts. He was winemaker at Duval-Leroy for a long time. I believe he turned down the job at Roederer to become a consultant, which is pretty amazing. Turned down the job to make Cristal. So they've got an amazing team, and Didier Pesson as well, who is a French champenois who also has vineyards which he has merged with the Hambledon estate and continues to help with the winemaking there. So that's a lot of rattling. That's Hambledon. That's the chalk of Hampshire. So let's talk about these wines. Well, first of all, Hambledon makes non-vintage wines. Two reasons for that. They're looking for consistency, and the non-vintage house champagne of any champagne house is their most important. But also, because of the climate in the UK and because the wines tend to be high in acidity, very tight, very concentrated, and a little bit compressed and linear when they're younger, you need to build in richness and breadth and texture any way you can. And one of the ways of doing that is blending through vintages, multiple vintages. And these wines age extraordinarily slowly, we've discovered that, and the wines reach their peak after quite some time. So these wines spend a long time in the cellar on the dead yeast cells from the fermentation. So they're a very long lees contact process. If you've ever heard of Bollinger RD, which is their sort of fancy left on the lees for a long time, it means récemment dégorgé, which means it's left on its dead yeast cells for a long time, which is enormous amounts of mouthfeel and texture. Well, these guys do a similar thing, and when we get to the Premier Cuvée level like this, the wines have at least 6 years, or 5.5 to 6 years, lees aging on them before they even consider release. So let's start with Hambledon Brut. This is Hambledon Premier Cuvée Brut. I think you'd agree. It's a love or hate bottle. I absolutely love this bottle. Bottling in blue, I think, was always a bold process and a bold statement by Ian. But I think he was thinking of the future and knowing that things have to change. And I think he's done an incredible job. It's a very modern font, but it's very stylish. I don't think he makes any apologies about the fact this is a bottle that's shamelessly the same shape as a Krug bottle. I think Jancis Robinson, quite a long time ago, when the first releases were created, alluded to the fact that it could be considered the Krug of Britain. But I think that's personal opinion. This wine is based on the 2014 vintage. And as you can imagine, throughout the entire lineup of wines, Chardonnay is very important because Chardonnay has this historical and physical connection with chalk soils. It performs exceptionally well. But we're going to go on to the other part of the story, and that is that Champagne is made from 6 different varieties in Champagne, and 3 are largely used without the other 3 being considered. And the 3 that most people will have heard of are Chardonnay, Meunier, and Pinot Noir, 2 red grape varieties and 1 white grape variety. But there are other varieties as well. There's Fromenteau, there's Le Petit Melier and Blanquette, I think it is, which is, so you've got Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, and another unusual variety. They're not used in the main. They've been sort of ignored and forgotten over time by a lot of the wine producers. But this wine is made largely from the magical Chardonnay from the front of the vineyard. If you go to the home vineyard at Hambledon, it has this wonderful sweeping single block, and off to the left is another beautiful block which gets a little bit more sun exposure, which is a fabulous Pinot Noir block. And this wine is 67% Chardonnay, 11% Pinot Noir, and 22% Meunier. And it's mostly from the 2014 harvest. So where are we at now? 2024. So the liquid in the bottle is 10 years old. Like a vintage champagne from a top house, you wouldn't see them until they're 7 or 8, possibly 9 years old. This is even older than that. Okay, so there is another important component. That is, there is quite a lot of reserve wine in here. I don't know what percentage exactly. Let's say it's about 12%, but 12% of this wine was made from vintages which are even older than 2014. 13 was very high acid, would age very well. 2012 was very difficult, very little was kept from that vintage. 2011 was amazingly concentrated. So there'll be a bit of those in there as well, and they would have spent time in oak. So a very small proportion of this wine has actually been barrel fermented, giving the wine yet another reason to be a bit more textured and rich. It's got the most amazing bubbles in it. Tiny bubbles in there, look. Gorgeous, tiny pinprick bubbles. The aging on the lees reduces the surface tension of the wine, which produces a much finer mousse. So the old tale that the older a champagne, the better, or the smaller the bubbles, the better. They both have some truth in the fact that older champagnes, wines that have been left in the cellar before they're disgorged to have their cork put in, tend to have much smaller bubbles chemically. Okay, physically, I don't know, chemically. Wow. Smells amazing. 2014 was a good solid vintage. It was the best. It was the first large crop vintage for some years since 2010, and it's much better than 2010. And it wasn't until 2 years later, 2016, which they got a crop as good as, if not better, than 2014. So it was a very, very solid vintage to make a premium wine on. And of course, because it's been old It's been aged for this amount of time. It's developed all sorts of extra layers of complexity and artifact, which make the wine taste very special indeed. It looks beautiful. I mean, it looks like Dom Perignon or anything else. That's a wonderful patina to it. Wonderful toasty nose. Biscuity. Slight hint of beeswax and resin. Sort of nutty resin quality. There is a house smell which I get from the Hambledon wines, particularly from their Chardonnay, which is kind of a lilac, vanilla, kind of fruity, white, waxy flower character, which sort of pervades almost all their wines. It still smells incredibly young. If I look on the back, it does give me the disgorgement date, which was at the end of the pandemic proper on the 24th of November 2021, which happens to be my mum's birthday. So that would have been disgorged on mum's 78th birthday. Wow. Amazing concentration of flavour, amazing purity of fruit, very clearly very dry. It's not so dry that it's zero Brut, as they say, or with no sugar at all, because I can detect there's some, what we call this toastiness, this autolytic character in the wine, the yeasty, bready, biscuit-based character you get in champagnes, particularly Chardonnay dominant ones. There has to be sugar present for that to happen. So it's probably a tiny amount. And I look on the website and it's claiming it's 2.5 grams, which would be almost unfermentable levels. But that's a very, very tiny addition. But it shows the pride and the confidence in their fruit that they would bottle this wine at such a dry level. From personal experience, having worked in sparkling wine businesses, not least helping with this one, you do find that when you start to drink the wines from your own vineyards, you want to see them completely bare without any makeup whatsoever. So it becomes common for winemakers to want to make their wines completely bone dry, although that can often be quite difficult and quite hard work for the consumer to appreciate in the short term. But this wine is really fantastic, really. Wow. Okay. I mean, from a point of view of judging wines, I don't know how you can not judge that as a gold medal wine. It's right up there in the top 1% of sparkling wines in the world, probably. But absolutely stunning and delicious, and it's going to be put back in the fridge for later. There we go. On goes Hambledon stopper. And we're going to go on to the brand new release. This is the first time I've seen this. This is the Premier Cuvée Rosé. Comes in a similar bottle, identical bottle, but wonderful sort of peach and orange tangerine kind of dressing on it. Similar font, of course. It just says Hambledon Premier Cuvée Rosé on the front. I think it's important we talk about prices here. The standard classic cuvée is around the £35 mark. This is £55, so equivalent to a Grand Marque champagne, really. Probably, what's that, roughly the same price. So cheaper than Bollinger, but the same price as Tattinger or something. And the Rosé is a quite eye-watering 75 quid. But they are trying to make the best wine possible. And if you do or are familiar with rosé champagnes, particularly things like Laurent Perrier and Bilkar Saint-Maur and other real good luminaries in the subject, they are that sort of money. And I think this wine has had even more care weighed on it. So if we look at this, well, I know it got silver last year on release, probably need a bit more time. But this wine, it says here on my list here, it says that it was disgorged in 2021. Yeah, 18th of August 2021. It's made from the otherworldly, and I do think the 16 for sparkling wine, 16 is a better vintage than the greatly heralded 2018, which was almost too warm. It was almost warm for a champagne vintage 2018. Great for table wines, but 16 for me is an absolutely stunner sparkling wine vintage, and the wines will age for a decade or more. And this wine was made in 2016 with a few reserve wines added to it. Long lees aging, so the wine was bottled in 2017, came out of the cellar in 2022. So again, pushing 60 months on lees, which is extraordinary. And the blend is 88% Pinot Meunier. We'll come back to that. 5% Pinot Noir and 7% Chardonnay. It's mostly 2016 harvest, they said. And because red wine has a little tannin, there's a little bit more residual sugar to offset this wine. It's 5 grams. And 5 grams can still make the wine taste quite austere and dry, but it's enough to keep that acidity in check, because in England, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier can be quite searingly acidic. Now, Meunier is funny. Meunier is not allowed to be planted on the best sites or the best chalk sites in Champagne because Meunier is not allowed in Grand Cru vineyards, which seems extraordinary because we've discovered, certainly in Hampshire, and certainly Ian and his winemaking team have discovered, that Meunier grown on chalk in England produces extraordinary wine. It makes for a more enigmatic, more individual, in some ways more authentic rosé than Pinot Noir does. Pinot Noir is seen to be much more the premium noble variety over Meunier and Champagne, but we have to admit that some of the best rosés in this country, perhaps the very best rosés, are Meunier driven, if not 100% Meunier. There was a special 100% Meunier release, very dark rosé by Hambledon a few years back, which was extraordinary. It just tasted like really high quality Burgundy, actually. And Meunier, other neighbouring vineyards, I think Exton Park, a very, very good producer, Corinne Seeley, she makes, who used to be the winemaker at Domaine Chevalier in Bordeaux. She makes extraordinary English sparkling wine there, and her rosés are 100% Meunier. Let's have a look at this. It's the first time I've had a go at this. The classic Cuvée, the rosé that you buy, which is just about £35, is absolutely amazing. I thought it was the best English sparkling rosé I'd ever tasted. Also based on the 2016 vintage. But this one's had the benefit of some reserve wines. It's a bit more gastronomic. It's certainly drier. Let's have a see. As you can tell, this show is slightly void of the usual facile gags. I feel quite privileged to drink these wines. I feel I'm in the presence of real greatness here. This is the classic colour that the French would describe as pelure d'oignon, or onion skin. It's darker than flesh, it's darker than a Provence rosé, you can tell from that colour there. But when you put it in the bottle, into the glass, it has this wonderful rose bronze patina to it, so like the skin of an onion. Wow. Wow. Okay. First thing is, you can't get away from the fact that it's made from Pinot. Meunier or otherwise, a gush of wild raspberries and strawberries comes flying out of the glass. Maybe strawberries and cranberries would be more accurate. There's a bit of raspberry there too, very much so. Much more mouthfeel. I think the level of residual sugar, the extra couple of grams, gives it a little bit more substance and more texture in the mouth. There's more skin oils, there's more extract there somehow. 2016 was a riper vintage too, so that would certainly play into those hands. I think this man, painted by Peter Lely in 1659, would have appreciated these wines back in the day. But of course, champagne wasn't invented yet. Not even English sparkling, which was the first. Now, when I'm tasting this wine, it's got a lovely red apple skin kind of tannin to it. There's a bit of grip there. There's a wonderful perfumed apple finish. Again, redolent of maybe the small aromatics of like fruits, garden fruits like strawberry. Then a searing, clean, pure, pinprick, laser sharp acidity on the finish. Not sour in any way, not out of shape. It just grows and grows, as Meunier tends to in the mouth, and Pinot. The red varieties tend to build in power. You end up with a wine which then has this faint, luminous echo at the end, which is absolutely delicious, which is probably the Chardonnay doing its bit. Well, there you go. Two absolutely stunning wines, not mucking around. 55 quid, 75 quid. So that's 200. That's 130 quid for the two. Pay peanuts, get monkeys, I think the phrase is. But these are very much at the top of the English winemaking tree, and would sit alongside any of the top 10 wines made in this country. And I think by rote that would mean that they would stand up against any champagne money can buy at any price. And I think these wines are absolutely amazing. It's been a treat to try the rosé. Thank you, Anna Woodbridge and Mensador, for sending these in to me. I look forward to seeing you in flesh at your press tasting. Thanks very much, and guys, see you next time.